Hi all, right, Chequers is dead, it is officially dead, but remember that it was already dead before it was given to the EU. There was already not enough parliamentary support for Chequers when it was sent to the EU. We had our Eurosceptics in the UK already shouting "chuck Chequers," and in fact, because they were worried that the EU might actually do some kind of work with it, that's why the ERG, the European Research Group, put in those 4 wrecking amendments into Chequers before it was sent off, so that the EU would have to reject it, and then they could all scream that the EU was being difficult and not working with Theresa May, and they can make a big fuss of it, which is exactly what they've done. And of course, most of the population would not know much about the wrecking amendments. They might have seen something about chuck Chequers, but the key thing is the tabloids can now blast around how the EU has behaved and we can get all jingoistic back on them. But that was deliberately set up by giving them a Chequers which they knew would fail. And so it's just a question of tone, and maybe Donald Tusk's Instagram post was a little bit silly, but relative to all of the other issues, this is trivial. Now, why was Chequers unacceptable to the EU? Well, apart from the Northern Ireland backstop, which is key, there's also the fundamental issue that you've got 27 countries and you're asking them to break the way that they operate for one country, which isn't staying, but leaving. This is very much like if you are playing in a football game and say, excuse me, I don't want to play for this team anymore. I want to play solo and stay on this pitch and be able to score goals for myself and be allowed to goal hang and be allowed to foul and not have to listen to the referee. Can we do that deal? In which case, people would probably tell you, no, you either stay within the team and play by the rules, or you leave the team and maybe play by the rules and we can find, or you just leave, right? So this is the territory that we were in. So where do we go now that we've had this fundamental standoff? What about Canada? Well, here's the thing about Canada. Canada means a relationship between the EU and UK, like that between Canada and the EU. That means a relationship between Northern Ireland and Ireland, like that between Canada and the EU. They are different regimes. That means a hard border for sure. So you cannot have Canada as a straightforward solution unless you have the Irish backstop guaranteed, which is Northern Ireland stays within the same regime as Ireland until such time as you can prove that it can operate without any border. Okay, so here's the problem with that. You've got people like Boris Johnson saying, oh, that's annexing, the EU annexing Northern Ireland. But frankly, it's something that our government would be prepared to do, most likely, were it not for the DUP. The DUP aren't having this. And the problem with the DUP is that they will not yield on it, and they're in government. So not only would they not vote for it and they would block it at parliamentary level, they would bring down the government over it. So you keep coming back to this problem that even if you wanted to do a Canada-style deal, you would have to have the Irish backstop agreed first before you set up that new relationship, which the DUP will kill every time because it holds the government by the cojones. Right, so what about EFTA? Is EFTA a solution? Well, EFTA would mean that we stay in the single market, and maybe you can do that with the customs union, and that way you'd preserve the Irish border and you'd actually come out of the EU into a sensible solution that you could then morph over time. However, the extremists would not accept EFTA, and we haven't had enough time preparing it. So the clock is running out. It wouldn't get through Parliament. It suffers the same fate as Chequers. It is blown up on this side, even if it's a reasonable working compromise that we could have gone for if we'd started working on it 2 years ago and didn't have nutcases that are engaged in brinkmanship. So then we're looking at a no-deal scenario, crashing out with a no-deal, and it is crashing out, not just leaving on WTO terms, because crashing is multiple breakages in our services, in our science agreements, flights agreements, cross-border healthcare, citizens' rights, the lot. you name it, it's contracts being broken all over the place, hence crashing out. And here is the problem. The UK are not prepared for this. You can see by their technical notes that they are not prepared for this, because a lot of those times there are frayed ends and there's hope that the EU would just help us out in that situation. However, the EU is thoroughly prepared. They have been doing this for much longer than we have in terms of preparations on a no-deal Brexit, and you're looking at 27 countries there working together on this, plus the shared civil service of the Commission working with them to ensure they can continue to operate. Furthermore, they are continuing with all the legal frameworks that they had before. Furthermore, they've all got 27 other countries, plus the rest of the single market, that they can continue trading with in services and keeping all of those legal frameworks. The UK drops out of all of those and is alone on all of its borders. And if you think that we continue as before with our relationships with the other countries, because who would want to stop that? Under what contract? That's the key question. Ask people, under what contract? The world is a network of contracts, and where there aren't contracts, stuff doesn't happen until there's a contract in place. To put a contract there means a deal, right? But what about rest of the world? Can't we just deal with the rest of the world? Well, under what contracts? A lot of the contracts we had with the rest of the world have been through the EU, so those need to be replaced in a whole series of deals, over 700 of them. That is the problem that we're facing. So that really is a screwed situation. And then if we unilaterally drop our tariff barriers in order to allow the goods to come in nice and cheap like the hard Brexiteers want, you have two instant problems there. One, you've given up all of your leverage in order for your goods and services going out. What's any country want to do a trade deal with you for if you've already let down all of your barriers and they've got exactly what they've wanted? You've got no trade deal leverage. Secondly, you've got all these products flooding into your home market like they weren't before, out competing your domestic production, and your domestic production is looking around the world at high tariff barriers everywhere and can't get its stuff out. That is double kill on your home production. So even if you've got cheap products in the supermarkets and everyone can afford them more easily, what are they going to afford them with? Money. Where are they going to get the money? From work that they do. Who pays them for the work that they do? Well, they're either selling to the domestic market or they're selling internationally, and if both of that is killed off, then we have less money that we're earning. That is the real killer there. But the thing is, there are some in government that actually want to engineer this scenario. If you look at some of the plans that have gone on within the cabinet about what would happen under that scenario, it would be slashing workers' rights. This is on record. Sajid Javid has actually proposed this: slashing workers' rights, slashing environmental protections, slashing certain taxes. And so what you have is you have a back against the wall situation where you can force the country to deregulate heavily because you're in this aggressive opposition with all of your neighbours. It means that you can apply the very aggressive, strong neoliberal medicine that they always wanted to. That is the danger. And if you think in this scenario that we would be doing all of these side deals to patch in the gaps quickly, when would you do those side deals? It's not before you come out without a deal, because you're trying to get the deal, right? So it's after you crash out, you have to do that. So you've invariably got a period without any contracts, without any deals, where you're trying to do these side deals. You're absolutely held hostage by that situation, because the first side deals that are going to be done are the ones that favour the EU, the ones that are most critical for the EU. How do we sort out something to do with the port of Rotterdam, which currently would take a hit, or maybe financial services? They'd sort themselves out first, and then things that are critical to us, you know, will come secondarily. So that is the very aggressive situation we'd be in. We'd be looking at nation-level disaster capitalism, where we're inviting some big aggressive entities to play with the market, but the people at the bottom are under the boot heel and get crushed. So what do we do? Now, general election or people's vote? With general election, it was being stated before that essentially the Tories wouldn't let this through for fear of Corbyn. What you're hearing now with the snap election is May take the gamble on a snap election. Here is why, I think. They calculate that if Labour win, then Labour carry the can on Brexit fate. If it's Remain, then they say, boo, boo, you let it all down, you know, you couldn't carry it through. If Labour tried to go through with Brexit, then they're responsible for all the mess that invariably happens. Either way, the Conservative Party go onto the opposition benches, lick their wounds, and then can shout at Labour that they're all messing it up, that they're betraying the country, you should hand back to the Tories, but basically they want to wait and see how someone else sorts out the mess, and they keep their party whole, which is always a priority for them. And then if the Conservatives win, then what they can do, if they win big, they can shed the DUP and they can do that Canada-style trade deal with Northern Ireland in the same union as Ireland and say, look, this is something that we have to do. And they've got the DUP that aren't getting in the way. Problem is, what about if it's a hung parliament again? Then we are screwed. But it is a gamble that Theresa May just may take. So then you've got the other option, which should be our backstop, or I think should happen anyway, which is look at this complete mess. Nothing can get through Parliament that can be agreed by Parliament. What we need is a people's vote. We need to say, this is the route out, or these are the routes out, and this is Remain. Public, you've seen all of the dynamics. What do you think? And my personal preference would be for it not to be binary like last time, but I'd much prefer the three-way thing, because that represents how people break down. You've got the government's deal, whatever deal they can patch together. You've got no deal Brexit, just because that's what some people want represented, and so you can't have them being betrayed, but also it splits the Brexit vote, and then you've got Remain. And I think that's what we should be going for. But this is what the landscape ahead looks like. And there are lots of indicators that there are those within the Brexit crowd that have always wanted a no-deal Brexit because they could not possibly get their aggressive reshaping policies into this country otherwise. The public would not support it otherwise. But if you can make the public angry with the EU, think that the EU is punishing us, then they will back all of these measures to undercut the EU, to strip away rights, to strip away environmental protections. Our life depends upon it, it's urgent, and then the country is forced into a place that the country never wanted to be, but the disaster capitalists at the top that can actually play this game and profit from it, that is what they want.